Everything Everywhere All at Once was nominated for 11 Oscars.
The Oscar goes to...
It won 7.
Everything Everywhere.
Everything Everywhere.
Jamie Lee Curtis.
Michelle Yeoh.
Everything Everywhere.
After the Oscar run, the movie was brought back into local theaters for only $5. My roommate wanted to go rewatch it, and we did. I've seen the movie 3 times now, but this time I went in with a different perspective. It's one of my roommate's favorite movies, so we sat together knowing what each scene was going to be and just enjoyed it. It's easy to praise Everything Everywhere All at Once for its innovation. It broke away from so many norms that Hollywood has established. And while we'll talk about its innovation in this video, there's another incredibly important part of a film's cultural impact: its staying power. Because every masterpiece deserves to be rewatched. There are 3 major points I want to talk about in this video. First is innovation. It was a remarkable decision to cast Michelle Yeoh as the lead of this film. Most people don't know this, but originally the Daniels wrote this role for Jackie Chan. However, when he turned it down, they realized that Michelle Yeoh, who they had envisioned as Jackie Chan's partner in the film, would make for an equally, if not more compelling, protagonist. And while I don't have a very strong understanding of the Hong Kong film industry, she very famously starred alongside Jackie Chan in the 1992 film Super Cop. She had a prolific career not only in Hong Kong, but also in Hollywood. She was the counterpoint to Bond in the 1997 film Tomorrow Never Dies, a lead in the famous martial arts film from 2000, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and the infamous Eleanor Young in Crazy Rich Asians. Michelle Yeoh's global impact on different film industries is substantial, so the choice by the Daniels to cast a now 60-year-old Asian female lead resulted in a much stronger product. And let's just take a second to think about that. Asian women are rarely cast in lead roles. Roles in Hollywood also infamously disappear for women not in their youth. How many films have you seen with a 50, 60-year-old female lead? Let alone the fact that this is an action film. And whenever women are leads in action films, how often are they sexualized and reduced? Everything Everywhere All at Once cast an Asian 50-year-old woman in its lead position, and I can't think of a better person for the role. But it didn't just stop there. They cast an actor that you might recognize from your childhood, from The Goonies or Indiana Jones. One on the verge of quitting acting altogether, having not been in front of a camera for 20 years despite consistent effort. Ke Huy Quan went from no recognition in Hollywood to winning an Oscar. He was cast to not only play 1 role, but 3. In preparation for this role, Ke actually worked with multiple acting coaches, one of which was a body language coach. They decided to choose 3 animals to represent each of the characters he was playing. First, a squirrel, representing the Waymond we're originally introduced to, Evelyn's husband. Second, an eagle, representing Alpha Waymond, his multiverse variation and more confident counterpart. And finally, a fox, representing Business Waymond, who delivers some of the most iconic lines from this movie. He jumps between being a stereotypical goofy dad, an action star, and finally, a chic, attractive, confident businessman. He expertly navigates switching between the first 2 roles he's playing, using actions such as removing his glasses and body language. And he really just sells me on these roles. It doesn't feel like one person pretending to be 3. And after such a standout performance, you can't help but be heartbroken that for 20 years he didn't have an opportunity to pursue his dreams. One of the most remarkable parts about Everything Everywhere All at Once winning 7 Oscars is it was competing against movies like Avatar: The Way of Water with 1/10 of the budget. In researching for this video, I actually realized that there's been a resurgence of a lot of mid to small budget films. If we look at the last 6 years at the films who have won Best Picture at the Oscars, each film has actually had lower than a $25 million budget. So to pretend that Everything Everywhere All at Once is some remarkable small budget film that's doing something no one else has done would be ignorant. But one thing Everything Everywhere All at Once did that I do want to acknowledge is the way it felt like a big budget film, despite having a $25 million budget. Because part 2 of this video is talking about the clever execution that made a small film feel big. There are so many components of this film that were expertly done, things that if they were done a little worse would take a lot away from the fluidity of this movie. For example, let's take a look at the scene in the IRS building when Evelyn first makes a jump between the multiverses. How do you demonstrate the feeling of jumping between universes? One of the first effects they use is a dolly zoom, where a camera moves away from its subject on a dolly while it zooms in an equal amount. In this case, they actually do the opposite though. They start with their camera further away from their subject, and as they move it in, they zoom out. Different focal lengths on a lens will impact both the subject and the background. The higher millimeter a lens is, the flatter the image. But they don't just stop there. They also use wind to move her hair. There's the obvious special effects of having the glass shatter and her exist in both universes at the same time, but the things that impress me more are their practical effects. For example, having Jamie Lee Curtis's character pop up with a literal spotlight to drag Evelyn's attention back to her original universe. That's clever, before they then use a reflection in a mirror to pull Evelyn's attention back to Alpha Waymond. The reason I believe that this is so important to the success of Everything Everywhere All at Once is the Daniels showcased an incredible amount of creativity. When you're watching the movie from a different perspective, suddenly there's a lot of things you notice. You know that van where Evelyn and Waymond are having a conversation about their divorce? Very obviously, that's the same van that Joy and Evelyn had their conversation in, where it's alluded to that Joy came out to her. But less obviously, it's the same van Alpha Waymond and his colleagues are using to jump verses while being mobile. There's a lot of subtle examples of this, reoccurring actors, or reusing set locations multiple times. It was done pretty well, which resulted in me missing it in my first 2 viewings. A huge portion of the movie is set in a single location, the IRS building, but they also use things like green screen effects and diversifying the settings enough to where it doesn't feel overused. It can't be that expensive to go into the mountains and shoot 2 rocks, but that again is another example of incredibly clever and creative writing. There's just a multitude of small things that I could pick out of this movie that make for an incredible viewing experience. The way they change the resolution when Alpha Waymond starts his first fight, the performances by all the actors involved, an incredible score and sound design that keep you grounded throughout this very jarring and, if we're being honest, incredibly weird set of action sequences. But even those decisions I think were purposeful. The reason this is important is because Everything Everywhere All at Once doesn't set the tone too seriously. Thank goodness, because I didn't want another butterfly effect. I remember finishing that 2004 Ashton Kutcher film and thinking, man, none of that made sense, and the entire time they treated it as if it was supposed to. I think it'd be easy to look at Everything Everywhere All at Once and find some holes in some of the logic behind the multiverse, but I don't think that's the point of the movie. So instead of taking itself too seriously, they have characters kicking their dogs and using them as weapons, a shockingly large amount of butt plugs, and a riot shield that's thrown like a boomerang and magically comes back to Evelyn. This sets a slightly more whimsical tone that allows for more suspension of disbelief, and it ultimately serves the purpose of this film, the final part of this video, the core of all art, the emotional impact. There are many aspects of art that can make you enjoy it. The execution, whether or not it's thought-provoking, what it represents, but pretty consistently in all forms of art there's a necessity to evoke some form of emotion. Even in art's most simplistic form, emotion is still the center. Action films that have no substance to their plot are still making you excited and engaged, whether or not it's feeling scared, happy, sad, intrigued, anything in between, because effective art causes some form of emotional response. When I first watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, I remember thinking that innovation was one of the primary reasons it was so successful. I loved the way it challenged norms, and I especially appreciated the way they executed those ideas. But inevitably, innovation is emulated, because when someone does something remarkable and unique, especially something that is a commercial success, others are quick to follow. This can take a film that was innovative at its time and quickly make it a cliché, antiquated product. So I was wondering, would Everything Everywhere All at Once transcend just a modern masterpiece and become a classic? And that led me to this immediate question, which is the core of what makes, I think, something have lasting cultural impact, the heart of a story, and whether or not it's capable of invoking a strong emotional response. Because Everything Everywhere All at Once, despite its sometimes silly presentation, tells a remarkably deep and impactful story. The multiverse theory is an incredibly difficult thing to talk about in a story, because discussing it often invokes an extreme sense of existential dread, feeding into our already nihilistic tendency in modern society. If there are an infinite amount of universes that branch out from every decision we make, it takes away a lot of the purpose in how we live, and that's exactly the question this movie asks. When you experience everything, everywhere, all at once, how can you value anything, anywhere, ever? If you were capable of imagining any circumstance and immediately jumping to a world where that exists, consequences would lose all meaning, and without struggle, triumph would feel empty. But the story is very clever in the way it approaches this idea. When Evelyn's losing her will to live in a world where there is no structure, one character is capable of challenging those ideas and finding value anyways. Waymond offers a perspective that brings value back into Evelyn's life. There's something about Waymond's character that especially resonates with me. A realistic acknowledgement that the world is cruel, and instead of just accepting that, choosing to fight with kindness and optimism. But Waymond isn't the primary protagonist of the story.
You know what I say? It's called unlovable bitches like us. Make the world go round.
Evelyn is. Waymond is guiding her in seeing the importance of kindness and compassion, finding value in life and human interaction and shared moments. It changes the perspective Evelyn uses to look at the nihilistic world she's now living in. It's now optimistic nihilism. Nothing matters, therefore we get to choose what we care about. There's a beautiful intellectual substance to this movie that works wonderfully in conjunction with the emotional impact. And there's something magical about seeing the life Evelyn chooses to live, despite being able to be anywhere. Evelyn was the hero the Alphaverse was looking for because her life was a collection of decisions that led to a consistent failure to her hopes and dreams, what she thought she wanted. Yet when she's given the opportunity to access any world, she chooses instead to do taxes and laundry with the people she loves.